Chapter 1. The assignment. The coal mining business in West Virginia back in the 1950s wasn't exactly a picnic, but it paid the bills and kept the lights on in towns like Harlan's Gap. I'd been working for the state regulatory board for about 5 years by then, mostly handling safety inspections and dispute resolutions between the big outfits and the smaller family operations. Harlan's Gap was a speck on the map in the Appalachian Mountains, surrounded by dense forests and riddled with old shafts that folks said went back to the Civil War era. The year was 1957, and the post-war boom had everyone digging deeper, faster, with less regard for the rules than my name's Jack Harlan. No relation to the town, just a coincidence that folks like to joke about. I was in my mid-30s, married to a schoolteacher named Mary, and we had a little boy, Tommy, who was just starting to ask questions about why Daddy spent so much time underground. The job wasn't glamorous. It involved a lot of paperwork, arguments with foremen who thought regulations were suggestions, and the occasional trip into the dark to verify claims of unsafe conditions. That particular assignment came across my desk on a rainy Monday in April. My boss, Mr. Ellis, a grizzled veteran with a perpetual cigar stub in his mouth, dropped a folder in front of me. "Jack, you're heading to Harlan's Gap. There's been some trouble at the Blackridge Mine. Reports of unauthorized digging, structural instabilities, and whispers of sabotage from rival companies. The owners want a neutral eye before they involve the feds." I flipped through the file. Satellite photos were non-existent back then, but there were hand-drawn maps, witness statements, and a few grainy photographs of cave-ins. Blackridge was owned by the Whitaker family, who'd been mining coal since before the turn of the century. They were feuding with the neighboring outfit, run by the McAllisters, over boundary lines that snaked through the hills like veins in a leaf. There was also talk of environmental damage spilling into the nearby state forest, which brought in the rangers that I wasn't thrilled. My last two inspections had turned into nightmares, prolonged investigations that ended in fines nobody wanted to pay and bad blood all around. Ellis had been riding me hard, hinting that one more mess up and I'd be looking for work elsewhere. "Make it clean, Jack," he said as I left. "No loose ends." I packed my gear: hard hat, lantern, notebooks, and a revolver just in case. Bears and bootleggers were still a thing in those parts. Mary kissed me goodbye, telling me to be careful, and Tommy waved from the porch. The drive took most of the day, winding roads through misty valleys where the trees seemed to close in like they had secrets to keep. Chapter 2. Arrival in Harlan's Gap. Harlan's Gap wasn't much to look at. A main street with a diner, a general store, and a cluster of clapboard houses clinging to the hillside. The mine entrance was a couple miles out, marked by a weathered sign and a chain-link fence. I checked into the only motel, a rundown place called the Mountain Rest, run by a widow named Mrs. Grady, who eyed me suspiciously over her spectacles. First thing next morning, I met with the mine foreman, a burly man named Earl Whitaker. He was in his 40s, with calloused hands and a perpetual squint from years underground. "Glad you're here, Mr. Harlan," he said, shaking my hand like he was testing my grip. "We've got a section that's been acting funny. Collapses where there shouldn't be, tools going missing, and some of the boys swearing they hear voices down there." Voices? That wasn't in the file. I pressed him, but he shrugged it off. "Miners' tales, probably. But the damage is real. Lost a good vein last week. Caved in overnight. No quake or nothing." He introduced me to his assistant, a young guy named Billy Ray, fresh out of the army, with a crew cut and a nervous tick. Billy drove me up to the site in a battered Ford truck, the road rutted and muddy from recent rains. As we bounced along, he chatted about the town, how the mine was the lifeblood, but folks were getting scared. Some say it's the McAllisters sneaking in, planting charges. Others, well, they talk about the old legends. "What legends?" I asked, half listening as I reviewed my notes. "The Hollow Men," he said, lowering his voice. "Stories from way back, Indian times maybe. Spirits that live in the earth, luring miners deeper. Poppycock, if you ask me. We arrived at the mine mouth, a yawning black hole framed by timber supports. The air smelled of damp earth and coal dust. Earl handed me a helmet with a lamp and led the way in. The initial tunnels were familiar: braced walls, tracks for carts, the distant echo of picks. But as we went deeper, things felt off. The air grew thicker, almost sweet, like rotting fruit. Chapter 3. The first discovery. We reached the problematic section about half a mile in. The tunnel narrowed, and ahead was a fresh collapse. Rocks and debris piled high, blocking the way. Earl shone his light on it. This happened 2 nights ago. No one was down here, but come morning, it was like this. And look, no blast marks. Just fallen. I examined the pile: jagged stones, twisted rails, but something caught my eye. Amid the rubble were odd shapes. Branches? No, this was underground. I pulled one out. It was a root, thick and gnarled, but not from any tree I'd seen. Where'd this come from? I asked. Earl scratched his head. Beats me. Maybe washed in from above. But we've had floods before. Never seen roots like these. Billy shifted uneasily. Some of the boys found similar stuff deeper in, piled up, like someone was building something. We cleared a path enough to squeeze through. Beyond was a chamber, larger than expected, with veins of coal glinting in the lamplight. But in the center was a mound, not of rock, but of intertwined roots, vines, and what looked like bones. Animal bones, I hoped. The air here was stifling, and I swear I heard a faint rustling, like whispers. Jesus, Earl muttered. This wasn't here yesterday. I took notes, sketched the mound. It was about 10 feet across, dome-shaped, with tunnels burrowing into it like entrances to a burrow. Insects crawled over it: beetles, ants, even a few snakes slithering in and out. No one spoke for a minute. Then Billy said, "We should get the ranger. This borders the state land." The ranger was an old-timer named Hank Dawson, lanky with a salt and pepper beard. He met us at the surface, chewing tobacco. "Heard about your troubles," he said. "Forest Service got reports too. Strange growths up top, near the old shafts." Chapter 4. Exploring the surface. Hank took me up the hillside the next day. The forest was thick, pines and oaks towering overhead, the ground carpeted in ferns. We hiked to a clearing where an old mine entrance had been sealed decades ago. But now, the boards were splintered, and vines spilled out like entrails. "Look at this," Hank said, pointing. The vines were unnatural, thick as wrists, pulsing faintly. They formed a web across the ground, converging on a depression in the earth, a pit about 20 feet wide. Inside was another mound, similar to the one underground, but larger, teeming with life. Birds nesting in the branches, squirrels darting about, deer tracks leading in. "This ain't right," Hank grumbled. "Animals don't bunch up like this. Predators and prey side by side." I felt a chill. The air hummed with silence. No birdsong, just the occasional snap of a twig. We poked around, and I found carvings on nearby trees. Old symbols, maybe Native American, worn by time. Back in town, I interviewed locals at the diner. Mrs. Grady poured coffee and whispered about the Earth's children, legends of beings that dwelled in the hills, drawing life to them. "Started in the 1800s, she said. Miners vanished, found later in strange nests. I dismissed it as folklore, but that night in my motel room, I dreamed of crawling through dark tunnels, building something vast." Chapter 5. Deepening mystery. Days blurred as I delved deeper. With Earl and Billy, we mapped the underground anomalies. More mounds appeared overnight, smaller ones branching off the main tunnels. Tools vanished: picks, shovels, only to turn up incorporated into the structures. One afternoon, we found a miner named Tom Wilkins asleep by a mound. He woke confused, hands raw from digging. "Must have nodded off," he said. But his eyes were glassy, and he couldn't explain the fresh roots in his pockets. Hank reported similar oddities above: hikers going missing briefly, found wandering with branches in hand. The McAllisters denied involvement, but tensions rose, fistfights in the bar, accusations flying. I wired Ellis for more time. Something's not adding up, I wrote. Mary sent a letter. Come home soon, Jack. Tommy misses you. That evening, alone in the mine, I heard it, a low hum, like breathing. The mounds seemed to shift, inviting me closer. Chapter 6. The confrontation word spread, and the Whitakers called a meeting. Earl's boss, Old Man Whitaker, a stern patriarch in his 70s, demanded action. We can't let this shut us down. Clear it out. They brought in dynamite, but Hank protested. This could be protected land. And those things, they're alive. Arguments escalated. I mediated, suggesting observation first. But that night, a cave-in trapped 2 men. We dug them out, alive but babbling about the heart, underground. I decided to stay overnight in the chamber. Set up a cot, lantern low. As sleep came, I felt a tug, like a dream pulling me. Woke to find myself adding rocks to the mound, hands moving on their own. Chapter 7. Revelation with Hank. We traced the mound's pattern, radiating from a central point deep in the hills. We hiked to it. A hidden valley, overgrown, with a massive nest at its core, the size of a house. Inside, movement, shadows, eyes. We spotted figures. Locals, sleepwalking, contributing to it. Tom Wilkins was there, eyes closed, weaving vines. Deeper in, we found the source, a creature, pale and segmented, like a giant worm with limbs, exuding a sweet scent. It pulsed, connected to the roots. Hank whispered, "The Earth's child. It's calling them." Chapter 8. The assault. The Whitakers mobilized. Men with torches, axes. I tried to stop them. It's not sabotage, it's something else. But fear won. They stormed the valley, setting fires. The nest erupted, animals attacking, insects swarming. Men screamed, bitten, stung. I felt the creature's pain, a sting on my arm linking me. In the chaos, shots fired. Hank fell, wounded. The creature emerged, massive, fleeing into the woods. Chapter 9. Aftermath. The fire raged, but the nest smoldered on. Injuries mounted. The mine closed temporarily. I reported inconclusive findings, saving face but knowing the truth. Hank recovered, retired soon after. The creature escaped. I felt it in my veins. Chapter 10. Lingering shadows. Years passed. I left the job, moved family away. But twitches remain, urges to build. It's out there, growing, waiting. Conclusion. The days following the fire in the hidden valley were a blur of paperwork, hushed conversations, and a gnawing sense of incompletion that clung to me like cold dust. Harlan's Gap, with its sagging porches and suspicious glances, seemed to close ranks, as if the town itself wanted to bury what had happened. I sat in my room at the Mountain Rest Motel, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and Mrs. Grady's lavender potpourri, trying to piece together a report that wouldn't get me fired. My notebook was filled with sketches of the nest, descriptions of the creature, and fragmented memories of that night when I'd woken inside the mound, surrounded by moss and the sweet, sickly scent of something ancient. But how do you write that down in a way that doesn't sound like you've lost your mind? I'd seen things, felt things, that didn't fit into the neat boxes of a regulatory inspection. The creature, that pale, segmented thing with limbs like a centipede and eyes that weren't eyes, had slithered away into the dark of the woods. I could still feel its presence, not just in the sting on my arm, where 2 small marks pulsed faintly, but in the way my thoughts wandered, unbidden, to the idea of building something. A nest, a home, a fortress. I'd catch myself picking up sticks on my walks back to the motel, twirling them between my fingers before dropping them like they'd burned me. The urge was subtle but persistent, like a whisper you can't quite make out. Hank Dawson was recovering in a hospital in Charleston, his leg bandaged where the bullet had grazed him. He'd called me the day after the incident, his voice rough over the crackling phone line. "Jack, you saw it, didn't you? That thing in the valley. It's not gone. It's just waiting." I didn't know how to respond. Hank had been a ranger for 30 years, seen bear attacks and forest fires, but this had shaken him. He talked about retiring, moving to the coast, somewhere far from the hills. "Those old stories," he said, "about the Earth's children. They ain't just stories. You be careful now." Earl Whitaker and his crew were licking their wounds too. The Blackridge Mine was shut down for 2 weeks while they repaired the damage from the cave-ins and dealt with the fallout of the fire. Old Man Whitaker was furious, not just at the loss of production, but at the rumors spreading through town. The McAllisters, ever the opportunists, were quick to point fingers, claiming the Whitakers had been reckless, maybe even cursed. I interviewed their foreman, a wiry man named Clyde McAllister, who swore his men hadn't been near the disputed land. "Ain't us, Harlan," he said, spitting tobacco into a tin can. "But I'll tell you, my boys don't go near that valley no more. Bad juju." The State Forest Service sent their own investigator, a prim woman named Eleanor Voss, who poked around the burned-out nest and declared it a natural phenomenon, an overgrown root system, perhaps exacerbated by unusual weather patterns. She dismissed the creature as a trick of the light, maybe a bear or a mountain lion caught in the flames. I didn't argue with her. What was the point? My job was to provide facts, not fuel ghost stories. But as she droned on about soil samples and erosion patterns, I noticed her hands trembling slightly, her eyes darting to the tree line. Back at the motel, Mrs. Grady cornered me one evening as I returned from the diner. She was sweeping the porch, her apron dusted with flour from baking. "You found something out there, didn't you, Mr. Harlan?" Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. I shrugged, tried to play it off, but she leaned closer. "My granddaddy worked those mines in the 20s. Said there were places you didn't go, places where the earth talked back. Called it the Hollow's Heart. You be careful what you bring home with you." Her words stuck with me as I packed my bags. The assignment was wrapping up, and I was due back in Charleston to file my report. I'd managed to keep things vague enough to avoid trouble with Ellis. No mention of giant worms or sleepwalking miners. But I knew the truth was Messier. The nest was gone, reduced to ash, but the valley felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. I drove out of Harlan's Gap on a foggy morning, the hills looming in my rearview mirror, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I got home, Mary was waiting on the porch, Tommy clinging to her skirt. She hugged me tight, asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine, just tired. But that night, I woke up standing in our backyard, a stick in my hand, staring at a pile of leaves I didn't remember gathering. Mary found me, her face pale in the moonlight. "Jack, what's wrong with you?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. The weeks turned into months, and life settled back into its rhythm. I took on new assignments, mostly desk work, as Ellis wasn't keen on sending me back into the field after my inconclusive report. But Harlan's Gap stayed with me. I'd get letters from Billy Ray, who'd quit the mine and taken a job driving trucks. "Things ain't right here," he wrote once. "Folks keep finding piles of branches out in the woods, small ones, like they're starting over." I didn't write back. What could I say? One night, I drove out to a nearby forest preserve, telling Mary the first needed to clear my head. I walked for hours, the crunch of leaves under my boots the only sound. Then I saw it. A small mound, no bigger than a wheelbarrow, tucked between two oaks. Roots twisted through it, and a single bird, a sparrow, perched on top, staring at me. I felt that tug again, the urge to add to it, to build. My hand stung where the marks were, now faded but still there, like a scar that wouldn't heal. That I started researching, digging through old records at the state library. There were stories, buried in dusty ledgers and oral histories, about the Hollow's Heart. Miners from the 1800s talked of living earth, of tunnels that seemed to shift overnight, of men who wandered off and came back changed. A Cherokee elder, quoted in a 1901 journal, spoke of a spirit that guarded the mountains, drawing life to it to protect its home. It sleeps, he'd said, but it wakes when the earth is wounded. I thought about that creature, its deliberate movements, the way it seemed to call to us. Was it protecting something, or was it building something? The nests, both above and below ground, weren't random. They were purposeful, like a hive or a dam, constructed with a logic I couldn't grasp. And the people, Tom Wilkins, Hank, even me, we were part of it, drawn in like ants to sugared. In the spring of 1958, I got a call from Hank. He was living in a small cabin on the coast, his voice weaker than before. "Jack, they found another one," he said. "Out by the old shafts. Bigger this time. The Whitakers are talking about dynamite again, but the Rangers won't let him. You gotta go back." I didn't want to. Mary begged me not to, said she'd seen me sleepwalking again, muttering about roots and dirt. But I couldn't stay away. The pull was too strong, like a hook in my chest. I drove back to Harlan's Gap, the road familiar now, the hills welcoming me like an old friend. The town hadn't changed much, but there was a tension in the air, thicker than the fog.